And joining me now is Scott Schober, cybersecurity expert at BVS Systems. So these tax prep firms sharing tax-related data, I mean, how big of a privacy violation is this?
Oh, this is huge. This is on a much larger scale and much larger proportion than your typical data breaches with big data that we hear about often, because this involves so much more personal information about those that filed the taxes. And I estimate between the three tax firms, it's probably well over 100 million individuals potentially that could be affected over the years if you look at their customer bases and size, number of filings that they actually have done. It's tremendous.
I mean, what kind of information are we talking about here?
Yeah, so it's the obvious, it's the names, it's phone numbers, it's email addresses, but more importantly to this particular case, it's the tax filing information. It's things like their filing status. Is it filed jointly or not? What's their adjusted gross income? Maybe the size of their tax refund, things like that. Information that it gets in the hands of a cyber criminal that potentially could be devastating and could be used against many people.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is very serious, but if you could paint us a picture of how this actually impacts American taxpayers.
Yeah, sure. Well, the average American taxpayer might use a service to save some money, and they don't understand all the little loopholes and things within the taxes, and it's done all the time, and it's very convenient and helps them. However, what they're not hearing, they're not giving consent, and they're not hearing what they're giving away. And what that is these tax companies are basically saying, we're taking your personal data and we are now selling it to third parties. We're selling it to giant tech companies. Google and Meta, in this particular case, were two that were identified. They in turn have third parties that they have agreements with, and they share and sell this information that's collected, this metadata and actual data about individuals. And that's what's so concerning, because it's going through multiple hands. Money is being made off of, in a sense, the Americans' backs, because our personal information is being sold. And it's not just, again, a name and a phone number, some basic information. It's intimate details about us and our finances. That's where the huge concern is. And every American that's using these services should be very concerned. And that's why there's a probe and an investigation to verify what did or didn't actually get divulged. And this is going to be an ongoing thing, and I would estimate it's going to probably be billions of dollars if they are found guilty in fines and arbitration and notifying customers and trying to clean up the mess. Will be devastating.
So you mentioned money is being made here. So I guess you're saying that
Yeah.
this is actually on purpose. It's not an accident.
Oh, yeah. This is part of their business model. This is how they get a return, in a sense, on their investment, by having these relationships with companies. And it's not unique to this industry, I should point out. This is done often. If you think about it, something as simple as our smartphone, when we download an app, we opt in, we agree when we say, I agree to the terms and conditions that nobody reads. And in those terms and conditions, it says, this company has the right to collect data and sell data about you and your contacts that you have in your contacts and what web searches you did and so on and so forth. So we're part of the problem. We're not reading what we're agreeing to. The legalities of these big tech companies, they make it in small print that nobody understands unless you're a lawyer and you don't have time to read it. So it's kind of a catch-22. There needs to be some level of regulation on this. And usually when the government steps in this case, the FTC is going to be analyzing it very closely, and certainly federal investigators, they're going to be imposing fines if they do find them guilty. And it looks pretty clear that there's been a lot of things that they've stepped over the line and pushed it to the point where it does affect the American consumer, and it does affect the data privacy, or at least we perceive we have data privacy when we fill out our secure tax return and we submit it online. Guess what? We really don't, and that is concerning.
And some of the companies here have responded. I'm sure you're aware. What's your reaction?
Well, it's very typical. It's sad to say, but large companies, I don't want to pick on them, but it's very easy to. In this case, a Google or Meta, when they get slapped on the wrist with a fine for X number of millions of dollars, and even in some cases in billions of dollars, as in the past, they could shrug it off because they've got deep pockets. They've got, a legal staff at their, beck and call that can fight these things and drag it out in court and settle it for pennies on the dollar. And that's often what happens, unfortunately. The challenge is they can afford to do that. If you contrast that to most startup companies and small businesses, which is kind of the backbone of America, we're still adhering to these data privacy laws that are expensive and they're hard to litigate and adhere to. The big guys can afford to do it. So what it really does indirectly, they pay these fines, they reduce the costs and negotiate it down. It squishes innovation and stifles small businesses. And that's not good. And startups, I should point out too, because they can't compete and maintain these levels of data privacy laws and keep data safe. It's just not fair. It's an unfair playing field. And in a sense, they're using it to their advantage by saying, yeah, well, we don't agree to this. We didn't really break any laws, or we'll fight this out in court. And they end up just paying fines, even though they know they did things that were wrong.
I mean, there are a few parties here. We have Google, Meta, and the three tax prep firms. Who's to blame here? Who gets the majority of the fault?
Well, I think unfortunately you have to kind of go back to the big tech companies, because big tech is behind a lot of this. What they're doing is they're condoning the use of what's called tracking pixels, which is basically software code that's used on websites. So if you're on a website and you're completing your tax form in this particular case, it's picking up all these different pixels or the different things that we type in. It parses it, combines it, and then it can take that and use that as data, and it could be in reports or whatever else, and then sold to the highest bidder. And in a sense, that's what they're kind of doing. So they're kind of condoning it. The tax companies, unfortunately, I guess, are making money on it, and they're kind of turning their head to the big tech companies that are paying them money for it. So they're both guilty. Who's more culpable than the other? I don't know, but I think when you look at a Goliath like a big tech company that knows what they're doing and knows what the potential damage of this, and they know very well, they're well versed in the privacy laws of data protection, better than the tax companies. And therefore, the onus, in a sense, should be on them to do what's right for the consumer, because that's the ultimate customer that's paying.
And let me just end on this. Do you think it's possible to prevent this from happening in the future?
Yeah, yes and no. If the big tech companies were more transparent, it would make it a lot easier. If there was a little bit more government oversight and regulation, it would certainly help. It would keep them in their lanes and allow them to focus on their core business as opposed to their, I call it the side business of selling data, selling our data to third parties, and that's really what they're doing. And it is wrong. It should be corrected. And laws such as that are enacted in the EU are preventing this from happening. A lot more has to happen here on U.S. soil, though, to prevent this from happening further.
All right, thank you so much today, Scott. It was a pleasure hearing your insight.
Yeah, great to join with you. Thank you. Stay safe, everyone.